Matt Whitaker, former U.S. Acting Attorney General.
This is such a great conversation about America, our future, what's going to save our republic.
We have a great football player. Matt Whitaker is here. Matt.
They tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed.
It's a touchdown. Whitaker.
Former Acting U.S. Attorney General.
Under President Trump.
I'm going to be an unwavering supporter of law enforcement.
Welcome to Liberty and Justice with your host, Matt Whitaker.
Today's episode is sponsored by Save Missouri Values PAC.
Welcome to Liberty and Justice with Matt Whitaker. I'm with my friend Ken Blackwell. Ken, glad you're here.
Good to be with you, Matt, always.
We're here at the AFPI Policy Summit, and we've been just spending really 2 days now listening to just wonderful panels talk about all the different things that are going on at AFPI and all their centers. And I know that you're running the Center for Election Integrity, I believe it's titled.
That's right.
And you're working with Hogan Gidley, who's another good friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys have done some amazing work, but a lot of your work has been out in the States. Why don't you talk a little bit about, because since you're a former Secretary of State in Ohio, you have a lot of experience with elections. Talk to me what you found, because I know a lot of people just glom the whole issue together, but you really have to almost go state by state, and I don't think we have enough time to do that, but just could you highlight a few of the things you found and some of the things you've been able to make a difference in?
Let me start by giving you a sense of the complexity of dealing with a decentralized system. Mm-hmm. What we've tried to do in the last 2 years is to stop the federal takeover of elections. The brilliance of our system is that we have bought into a notion that Aristotle made very clear. He said that there's a dynamic tension between the organized power and muscularity of the state and individual liberty. The more burdensome and intrusive the state, the less individual liberty we have. So the founders of our constitutional republic decentralized a lot of the power, pushing it to not only state governments, but then to local governments, using the principle of subsidiarity, that government that is closest to the people is the best, which then buys into what you and I have always worked on. The theory is that the family is the incubator of liberty, and it's the most primary system of governance in our experience. And so what we've tried to do as we've gone back out into the states is to start with the fact that there are over 3,000 counties in the country. You have 50 states and territories, and they have their rules and regulations that determine the time, place, and manner of elections. But there are some basic tracks that are very important to maintaining the integrity of elections at the local level. One is a tight chain of custody. You don't want too many hands touching the ballot once it leaves the voter. And then the second is verification. Verification is simply put, is making determinations that a voter is who he or she claims to be. And so we know that that's easier to do if election administration is at the precinct level. And so we have in fact tried to start by working at the precinct level and building up. And so, we have a saying, if you're not in the room, you're not in the game. And one of the things that we've realized is that a lot of precincts at the county level go uncovered. And therefore, as a consequence of that, there isn't a transparency, there isn't a bipartisan participation in the administration of elections that build voter confidence in the results. So that's what we want to do. We want to build confidence in the results. Whether you win or lose, we want you to be able to say it was fair and square.
Good. Well, and those that watch this show know that I get really excited when Greek and Roman philosophers are mentioned. So that quote from Aristotle that you mentioned reminds me of what Reagan also said, which is, as government expands, liberty contracts. It's kind of, he said it's as true as a physics equation.
That's right.
But it's the same thing, that it's so important that an all-powerful state does infringe on individual liberty, and unlimited individual liberty obviously infringes on state power
Yeah.
And some would argue in a pretty good way.
Well, and that's why, this is not just philosophy. This is practical human experience.
Yeah.
And that is, look, one of the things that we know in the American history is that there was a time when we had to be concerned about access to the ballot. There were unfair restrictions. I know as a kid growing up, before I even was able to vote, given that I was not 21, I did work in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, and other places with the civil rights movement. I would drive up when I was 16. I would run errands to make sure that the civil rights workers who were registering people got the job done. But I remember back then, there were restrictions to access to the ballot. I mean, there were times in precincts when people would go in to vote, and before they could vote, they had to tell the registrar how many jelly beans were in a jar. And if they couldn't tell them how many jelly beans were in a jar, they didn't get the vote. They had to go home. And so the civil rights movement focused in early on access to the ballot. But as we began to win case after case, and we built capacity for people to have access to the ballot box, starting about maybe 14, 15, 16 years ago, I started to focus on the other voting right, and that is the right not to have your vote negated by an illegal ballot. And so we started to say, look, within the context of American citizenship, there are rights and there are duties. Now, duties can be overly burdensome, but a simple duty is when you're expected to show some sort of proof that you are who you claim to be, so people don't have to worry about your ballot negating theirs because it's illegal. And so we started to push, particularly after the Supreme Court decision in 2018, to have local precinct workers require photo ID. And I'll just tell you, Matt, that's so simple because it's not overly burdensome. Photo ID is such a rapid part of our culture that it's a reasonable step to take to make sure that people can feel comfortable that their ballot, which was a legal ballot, was not negated.
And it's so true. If you think, Ken, about all the things in our society that require a photo ID, to buy beer, to get on an airplane, and we could just go through the list of all the various, to cash a check. I mean, it's a basic security feature of modern living that you have a photo ID that says who you are, and they compare that to the voter rolls. And I know that you often say, and I'll say it for you, is we want to make voting easier and cheating harder.
Absolutely. And let me give you another example, because we're here for this podcast in Atlanta. Georgia had major reforms last year in their election law, and one of those reforms was the requirement of a photo ID. The left went crazy, and you had Major League Baseball go woke, and they decided to move the All-Star game, which was
supposed to be here in Atlanta,
Atlanta, and move it to Denver, Colorado. Now, just think about this. One, if I'm a shareholder of Cincinnati Reds, and if I would leave you,
I'll feel better when my Cardinals. We're talking senior circuit now.
If I would leave you tickets at the will call window to come see the Reds and Cardinals play,
which you will. I'm excited about that.
You had to show a photo ID. Can you imagine going up to that will call window and showing them your utility bill? It wouldn't stand. So, I challenged the commissioner to the disgruntlement of a lot of my buddies. I said, give me a break. You're going to take an all-star game, which was going to generate, by all reasonable estimates, $110 million. for the city of Atlanta, a city that is well over 50% black.
Yep.
Sent it to Denver, Colorado, which was 9% black. And Colorado has more restrictive laws than the reform laws in Georgia.
Yeah.
It was one of those things to make you say, huh?
Exactly.
What's happening?
Exactly.
And so that's what we challenge. We challenge, the response to the explosion of common sense that the American voters are expecting us to apply to elections, to build confidence.
Right, and I've said this really ever since the 2000 election, and that is that no matter what you think happened, and there's a lot, I run into people all over this country that do not believe the results of the 2020 election, and there are instances you can point to, including what happened in Wisconsin with the former Supreme Court justice's report that demonstrated, sort of the turnout in some of these nursing homes, for example, and the same verification signature was on all 20 some ballots from nursing. You can point to these examples, and so, but what we can't have as a country, we can't have as a nation, it is, and it's not sustainable, is that almost 50% of the country believes that the result was not what the result was published. That's so dangerous.
That is so dangerous, and that's why I think the Sousa film that's getting ready to come out, 2,000 Mules, the Citizen United, the documentary, Rigged,
which you star in,
Molly Hemingway's book,
Rigged,
which she'll be speaking as she has been across the country. They've focused on illegalities, unconstitutional actions, anomalies, and a host of irregularities that just erode confidence in the election. But we've started to focus on, the use of about $400 million in selected counties, money that was launched through C3 organizations, and then impacting and being infused into targeted districts, counties, and precincts. That actually gave you some skewed, results. And when you stop to think that Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin, those three states combined, only 42,000 votes gave the ballot, gave the victory, and the Electoral College votes to Biden. You flip those 42,000, and you get a different president. You get a different number at the Electoral College. And let me tell you, that is what is so important for us, that we focus in on those things that eroded the even playing field and ultimately erodes confidence in the results.
Yeah, and each state sort of has their unique story. You point to those three. I went down to Arizona right after the election. The president asked me to go down there and work with the team on the ground to see what had happened. And the official count was, I think, less than 10,000 votes that Joe Biden won Arizona. And what we found was that a judge kept open the voter registrations illegally, inconsistent with Arizona state law. Kept it open for an extra 10 days, and they were able to register over 10,000 voters in Maricopa County, and ultimately, and lo and behold, that became almost exactly the margin. And so in each state, like I said, you can point to Wisconsin and what the former justice found there. You can point to Georgia,
Fulton County.
Right. I know there's some people that have done data analysis on sort of substantially similar counties in Ohio versus Pennsylvania, and they found some interesting, can't be explained. If the same group of people vote entirely differently, it can't really be explained just because they saw different advertisements on TV. But we could talk about this all day, and you're the expert. You've sort of had so much experience in this, and I love the fact, and I didn't appreciate your history, that you had spent really a lot of your early life working on access to the ballot, and so you understand sort of the games that are played at that level, and that part of our nation's history is obviously repugnant and should have never been through that, and kind of the way that sort of post-Civil War Reconstruction and really Jim Crow laws and all those kind of things is it's part of our American history, but it's a very embarrassing part of it, and it's something that we need to make sure never happens again. But that's not what we're trying to do in sort of this election integrity fight. Is what we're trying to do is, to your point, is to make sure that every lawful vote is counted, that it's easy to cast, but we have protections, that we're not foolish in who votes and how they vote, and making sure then that it's counted and tabulated in a proper manner. I think one of the more frustrating things for me is, I look at my home state of Iowa, which has done elections. It's as far as the eye can see. But we get our election results that night. We count them, and they're verified. In fact, we had a recount in one of the congressional districts where the night of the election, I think it was 7 votes. The Republican candidate won the congressional seat by 7 votes. They went back, did a recount, counted again, still 7 votes. I mean, it's that kind of accuracy that I think gives people confidence, and we talked about that. I want to completely pivot because I think you're such an interesting American story, and your public service, and you've always raised your hand and said, I'm interested in serving. And I know, tell me about, in the Trump administration, the president appointed you to the United Nations. But there's more to it.
Well, he used my experience, and as we worked on the transition coming into the White House. I had worked in the State Department. I had been the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, in charge of the human rights portfolio, and so I had the privilege of crisscrossing the globe and watching how various forms of government either empowered individual freedom and celebrated the dignity of the individual human versus those that didn't have citizens, but they had subjects. Didn't have folks, the brilliance, Matt, of our constitutional republic can be found in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, which says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. My dad used to say, that's a highfalutin way of saying any knucklehead should be able to get this, that our human rights, our fundamental rights are not grants from government, they're gifts from God. And so there's not a government on the face of the earth that can give you your human rights. They can only respect your human rights. And that's throughout my engagement as an American citizen, as a freedom-loving citizen. That's what I've worked on. And so we've tried to infuse that in every aspect of the Trump administration, and Brooke and others who I work with, in making sure that we framed our policies right based on that respect was very helpful. And so I now co-chair the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, funded primarily by the United States Agency for International Development. And we don't do elections in the United States, but we do elections all over the globe. And so I've been able to find systems that work, and I've been able to advance policies in election administration that actually empower the individual and give them a sense of fair participation. But I'll tell you this, in 2020, there's something that we should always remember, because there's the old adage on the left, never let a crisis go to waste. If you go back 100 years, in 1918, we had the Spanish flu pandemic. In 1929, we had major economic disruption. In 1968, we had waves of urban violence. In 1974, we in fact had the impeachment process initiated against Nixon. Well, in 2020, we had all of the above. And so it was, you just think about the complexity, the disruption of those phenomena, economic disruption, a pandemic. We, in fact, the left used it to radically change our election system. One of the things that has benefited me is that in in about 8 years ago in Liberia, they had Ebola.
Yep.
But you know what? Those folks figured out a way to conduct in-person elections in that developing country. Yeah. And what we did was abandon those things that give us a sense of integrity to our system and ballot security, as well as access. And so, as I work across the globe, one of the things that I know that the left is now pushing an accelerated push towards all mail-in balloting.
Yep.
That's rejected every place that I've ever worked across the globe, because it takes the human engagement at the local level out of the process. Yeah. It is not as transparent as people working at the precinct level, people voting in person, and that's why I will just go down fighting to make sure that we don't move in a way that will just destroy human engagement, citizen engagement in the process.
And I talked about it on this very first podcast show I did, where the federalization of the election, what the bill they were proposing would allow you to register online, request an absentee ballot online, and then send that in, ultimately with never anyone knowing that you were a real person or existed. It's a frightening paradigm, and to your point, anybody of common sense knows that we need to prevent fraud. We need to make sure that legal votes are counted and they're cast by legal voters. But ultimately, it's the community piece that I think we just, for some reason, in today's internet world, maybe we don't appreciate that it was, sort of the poll workers are your neighbors, and they know who you are, and they know, and so it's a very, very much, that's an important part of our fabric. It was, it's that basic precinct level, that's your neighborhood voting block, where, and you said all politics are local, and you need to get it down to the basic kind of group, and that's your precinct.
You're absolutely right, and to your audience, I would just encourage them to go to a 1981 book written by John Nesbitt. It was called Megatrends.
Okay,
and
I remember that.
And in that book, he has a chapter called High Tech, High Touch. Mm-hmm. And what he basically says is that as we rapidly move and develop high technology, what we have to realize is that there are systems, there are processes, there are human needs that require the human touch, and I think that's what we have to do. Where can we use technology, not to the exclusion of engagement, human engagement, people exercising human agency in the process, because it is the most important process of making sure that we're not subjects, that we are citizens, and those people who we give power to represent us in government still have a line of accountability to us, not to some algorithm.
To your point, the Constitution, we the people.
That's right.
And so we need to always remember it is the people that are in charge. They work for us and not vice versa.
That's right.
Well, we're going to leave it at that. How can people learn more about what you're doing or get a hold of you? Is there...
Well, we can go to kenblackwell.com, or you can go to americafirstpolicy.com and look us up.
All right. Well, Ken Blackwell, it is my honor to have you on Liberty and Justice. We'll have to do this again as we progress towards 2022 and 2024. But you are a true American treasure, and I appreciate your time today.
Right back at you,
brother.
brother.
All right. Thank you, my friend.